случилось неожиданно, как всегда.
It was completely unexpected, as such things usually are. The siren sounded very loudly, and I just sat there for a few seconds, staring at the screen with the word "launch" displayed in bold red letters. A minute later, the siren went off again. The second missile was launched, then the third, and the fourth, and the fifth. The computers changed their alerts from launch to missile strike.
It was a quiet night in late August of 1983. The world was sleeping, unaware that the most dangerous moment of the Cold War was quietly unfolding. On one side, superpowers armed with thousands of nuclear missiles, each capable of wiping out entire nations. On the other side, a teenager, alone, curious, and reckless. A boy whose curiosity would almost ignite the greatest catastrophe humanity had ever faced. Sergei, just 17 years old, lived in a small town in the Soviet Union. He was fascinated by computers, fascinated by strategy, fascinated by the invisible threads that controlled the world. While other teenagers played in the streets or collected stamps, Sergei spent hours at the local computer lab, learning how machines could mimic the human mind, how patterns could be predicted, and how systems could fail in ways nobody expected. But he had no idea that one simple mistake could bring humanity to the brink of annihilation. For those seeing this channel for the first time, this is Dopsera documentary, and we talk about everything strange and mysterious on this planet. And as always, before we begin, let's remember that we are still boycotting and standing firm. And no matter how much you enjoy this video, don't forget, victory comes with patience. In this video, we'll tell you about the teenager who almost triggered World War III. The story begins with a machine called Oko. Known to very few outside the Soviet military, Oko was part of a secret early warning system designed to detect incoming American missiles. Its purpose was to give the Kremlin time to retaliate in case of attack, a fail-safe, a shield against annihilation. On that night, a series of unusual readings appeared on Oko's console. Bright red blips, missiles apparently launched from the United States, heading straight for Soviet territory. Alarms screamed, red lights flashed. Officers in a hidden command center froze, staring at screens they had trained to trust above all else. And yet it wasn't an attack. It was a glitch, a malfunction in the system that no one fully understood. But for the commanders watching the screen, the threat was terrifyingly real. Sergei didn't know about Oko at the time. He wasn't involved in military decisions. He wasn't even close to those command centers. Yet, in the unfolding chaos, the boy's experiments with computer simulations unknowingly mirrored what the military feared most, a scenario where a false warning could trigger a real-world catastrophe. To understand why this night was so dangerous, imagine this. Each missile on the screen represented not just a weapon, but a chain reaction of fear and retaliation. One push of a button and millions of lives could vanish. Nuclear codes could be executed in minutes, and by the time humans realized it was a false alarm, it would be too late. In the command bunkers, officers debated, argued, hesitated. There was no room for error. The system was designed to trust the machines, to act swiftly, to prevent being caught off guard. And yet the machine itself had lied. The orders, if given, would have been irreversible. But here's where the story gets extraordinary. One single officer, Stanislav Petrov, noticed something strange. He didn't trust the computer blindly. His instincts told him the alert was too perfect, too precise, too mechanistic to be real. He thought about the human cost, the impossible speed at which events were unfolding, and made a decision that went against every protocol in the book. Petrov decided not to report the missile launch as an actual attack. He hesitated, he reasoned, he waited. And in that moment of human judgment, born not of data, but of intuition, he prevented what could have been a nuclear strike of unimaginable scale. Meanwhile, Sergei, thousands of miles away, continued experimenting with computer simulations that evening, unaware of how closely his small-scale computer models mirrored the terrifying reality of global nuclear systems. In another universe, in another chain of decisions, a small error in his code, a wrong input, could have triggered a false alert like the one Petrov faced. Let's pause to consider the stakes. At that moment, the world was closer to nuclear war than almost any time before or since. Soviet radar systems indicated incoming warheads. American intelligence systems were monitoring the Soviet Union for signs of retaliation. The Cold War was not just a geopolitical struggle. It was a constant, invisible tension where the smallest mistake could trigger the unimaginable. Petrov's intuition wasn't celebrated immediately. In fact, for years, no one outside his circle knew the truth. The danger he had prevented was invisible, like a shadow passing over the planet that no one noticed. Yet history would quietly mark that night as the closest the world ever came to nuclear war in the late 19th century. What makes this story resonate, even decades later, isn't just the risk, it's the human element. One man making a choice guided not by algorithms, not by computers, but by empathy, logic, and hesitation. And one teenager tinkering with technology in his bedroom, unknowingly walking along the same path of danger. It is a story about the fragility of systems that rely too heavily on precision, the unpredictability of human intuition, and the weight of responsibility carried in silence. Experts who have studied the incident describe it as a miracle of human judgment. Dr. Elena Kovalev, a historian of Cold War conflicts, explains, the OCO system was highly sophisticated, designed to remove human error, and yet it was human intuition that saved the world. It shows that no matter how advanced technology becomes, it is ultimately shaped and restrained by human choices. Psychologists note another lesson. Sergei, the teenager, represents curiosity and ingenuity without awareness of consequences. Petrov represents wisdom, tempered by caution. Together they symbolize the duality of progress and risk, the very tension that defines the nuclear age. Fast forward to today, and we see echoes of that night in modern systems. Cyberattacks, digital simulations, AI-driven decisions all carry the potential for catastrophic mistakes. We still rely on humans to interpret alerts, to intervene, to prevent disaster. Yet technology continues to grow faster than our ability to fully understand it. Imagine if Petrov hadn't hesitated. Imagine if Sergei unknowingly triggered a similar chain reaction. One decision, one miscalculation, and an entire generation could have been erased. History often remembers wars with clear beginnings and endings, marked by treaties and armistices. But the war that never happened, the one avoided by intuition, by choice, by a human pause, is just as real, and it is often forgotten. In reflecting on this story, we see both danger and hope. Danger because the systems we trust can fail. Hope because humans, despite all the machinery, all the alarms, all the protocols, remain capable of compassion, hesitation, and reasoning. One person's choice, one human mind, can prevent the unthinkable. It is a reminder that technology, power, and curiosity, no matter how advanced, must always be guided by judgment and conscience, and that even the smallest actors, a teenager experimenting with computers, An officer, sitting quietly in a dark control room, can influence the fate of millions. So when you think about history, remember this: the world can come closer to disaster than we imagine. Sometimes it is not generals, nor presidents, nor hackers, but quiet decisions, human pauses, and the courage to think differently that determine our survival. Sergei continued his experiments, unaware of how close the world came to the edge. Petrov continued his life quietly, without recognition, the man who saved millions through thoughtfulness and calm judgment. The world moved on blissfully unaware that on that one quiet night in August, civilization hung on the balance, not because of bombs, but because of the fragile intersection of human curiosity and human responsibility. And maybe the most chilling thought of all is how often that balance exists in our own lives, unseen, unnoticed, waiting for one small decision to tip the scales. If this story made you pause, think, or even feel the tension of that night, remember, history is full of such moments, invisible but powerful, shaped not by machines, but by humans.
The big question is, if you were in Stanislav Petrov's place that night, alone in a control room, alarms screaming, and a computer insisting nuclear missiles were incoming, would you trust the machine or trust your own instincts? Why? Share your reasoning in the comments. What would guide your decision when the fate of millions is on the line? Subscribe to Dopsera for more stories like this, strange, mysterious, and often too incredible to believe. And next time you see a system running flawlessly, remember, sometimes it is human judgment, not technology, that saves the world. Peace, and see you in the next story.